Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my commentary today. For years, the S-400 was marketed not merely as a weapon, but as an idea, proof that Russia had escaped technological dependence, that it could build a sovereign shield immune to Western pressure. It was sold to allies and rivals alike as an answer to American air dominance, a steel dome standing outside the rules of sanctions, supply chains, and global leverage. That story is now collapsing. What the new RUSI findings reveal is not a minor flaw or a battlefield setback. They expose a strategic illusion. The S-400 is not failing because it cannot track targets or launch interceptors. It is failing because it is embedded deeply and unavoidably in a global industrial system that Russia does not control. Behind the rhetoric of self-reliance lies a system dependent on foreign microelectronics, Western radar materials, and specialized ceramics sourced far beyond Russia's borders. This matters because modern power is no longer defined by what a state can design on paper, but by what it can reliably produce under pressure. The S-400 is not a standalone fortress. It is a chain, and chains break at their weakest link. High-frequency radar laminates were developed in the United States. Beryllium-based materials transiting through Central Asia. Production nodes are concentrated in facilities that sit within reach of Ukrainian long-range strikes. None of this is theoretical. It is measurable, traceable, and exploitable. The shock is not that Russia imports components. Every advanced military does. The shock is that Russia built its most critical defensive system on the assumption that these dependencies could be hidden forever, masked by intermediaries, tolerated by weak enforcement, and protected by the myth of inevitability. That assumption no longer holds. This is the real turning point. The S-400 was never an invincible shield. It was a globally entangled system pretending to be autonomous. And once that contradiction is exposed in wartime, the consequences are not gradual. They are sudden, structural, and potentially irreversible. The true vulnerability of the S-400 is not visible on radar screens or parade grounds. It lies buried in material specifications, procurement routes, and industrial chemistry areas where ideology offers no protection and slogans provide no substitute. What RUSI's analysis strips bare is a simple, devastating reality. Russia does not control the technological bloodstream of its own air defense. At the heart of the S-400's radar complex are high-frequency materials designed to handle extreme signal density without distortion or heat failure. These are not commodities that can be improvised. The RO4003C laminates used in advanced radar arrays are the product of decades of Western materials science, tightly regulated, precisely engineered, and extremely difficult to replicate. Without them, radar performance degrades, range shortens, from accuracy weakens, and resistance to jamming collapses. There is no domestic Russian equivalent that offers the same reliability at scale. Equally critical is beryllium oxide ceramic, sourced through Central Asia, particularly Kazakhstan. This material is not optional. It enables high-power radar components to operate continuously without catastrophic thermal breakdown, remove it, or dilute its quality. And the system overheats, fails early, or requires radical design compromises. This is not a matter of convenience. It is a matter of physical law. Add to this the dependence on foreign microelectronic signal processors, converters, and control components that Russia cannot mass produce at the necessary performance level. These parts arrive through layered posredniki, trading firms in China, shell companies in Hong Kong, logistics corridors through Kazakhstan. Each link adds cost, delay, and risk. Each transaction leaves a footprint. This is the strategic irony at the core of the S-400. The system presented as a symbol of defiance is, in reality, a monument to interdependence. It functions only as long as a global network continues to feed it materials. Russia cannot replace quickly, cheaply, or covertly enough under sustained pressure. Once this dependence is understood, the S-400 stops looking like a shield. It looks like a hostage to supply chains, to enforcement, and to time. And in war, time is the one resource that no sanctions system ever has enough of. The convenient myth is that sanctions are blunt, ineffective tools that Russia simply learned to live with them. This belief is comforting because it absolves policymakers of responsibility. But it is wrong. The problem was never the law. The problem was the lack of will to enforce it as a coherent strategy. Sanctions against Russia's defense sector were written as barriers, but implemented as obstacles. Easy to walk around, easy to dilute, easy to ignore when commercial incentives intervened. Export controls existed on paper. While intermediaries flourished in practice, critical components continued to move, not because rules were unclear, but because enforcement was fragmented, national rather than collective, reactive rather than anticipatory. The S-400 supply chain exposes this failure with brutal clarity. Radar materials sourced from the West did not vanish. They reappeared under different invoices. Microelectronics restricted in one jurisdiction resurfaced through another. Logistics corridors through China, Hong Kong, and Kazakhstan were not accidents. They were predictable outcomes of a system that punished exporters but tolerated middlemen. Every unmonitored transit state became a pressure valve. Every loophole became an artery. What Ruzi's findings force us to confront is this. Sanctions that are not synchronized become signals, not constraints. They warn adversaries without stopping them. They teach evasion faster than they impose cost. Russia did not defeat sanctions, it mapped them. Now, that phase is ending. Washington and its partners are no longer treating sanctions as symbolic gestures or diplomatic messages. They are beginning to view them as operational tools designed to deny, not to inconvenience. This marks a profound shift. The question is no longer whether Russia can acquire components, but how long it can do so before delays, costs, and disruptions cascade into production failure. Enforcement, when coordinated, does not need perfection. It needs sequencing. It needs to identify choke points, not entire economies. It needs to focus on materials that cannot be stockpiled easily, substituted quickly, or smuggled invisibly. In the case of the S-400, those points are now clearly visible. This is the uncomfortable truth Moscow faces. Once enforcement becomes systematic, evasion becomes exponentially harder. Every workaround becomes slower. Every shipment becomes riskier. Every factory becomes dependent on timing it cannot control. Sanctions did not fail. They were never fully tried. And when enforcement finally aligns with intent, the illusion of resilience collapses, not with a headline, but with a production line going silent. What is emerging now is not an escalation in the traditional military sense, but something more precise and far more dangerous for Moscow, the transformation of sanctions into an industrial denial system. This is the moment when economic pressure stops being symbolic and becomes a weapon. The logic is cold, methodical, and deeply modern. Instead of attempting to block everything, the strategy focuses on a few materials and processes that cannot be replaced, cannot be rushed, and cannot be hidden indefinitely. High-frequency radar laminates, specialized ceramics, precision microelectronics. These are not stockpiles you can build once and forget. They are inputs that must flow continuously or production stalls. This is where sequencing matters. First, intelligence maps the supply chain, not just factories, but intermediaries, transit hubs, and timing windows. Then enforcement tightens, not everywhere at once, but exactly where disruption multiplies downstream effects. A delayed shipment does not merely slow production, it forces redesigns, quality degradation, and cannibalization of existing systems. One broken link ripples across the entire air defense architecture. Crucially, this economic pressure is now being synchronized with battlefield reality. Several facilities tied to S-400 production lie within reach of Ukrainian long-range strikes. These are not mass casualty targets. They are industrial nodes. The message is unmistakable. Even if components arrive, even if sanctions are evaded, assembly is no longer guaranteed. Time, once Russia's ally, becomes its enemy. This combination targeted enforcement plus selective military pressure creates a dilemma no propaganda can resolve. Russia can disperse production, but dispersion slows output and magnifies dependency on logistics. It can harden facilities, but hardening raises costs and attracts attention. It can accelerate production, but acceleration increases defects. When inputs are scarce, every choice worsens another vulnerability. This is what supply chain warfare looks like. It does not announce itself with shock and awe. It advances quietly, steadily, and relentlessly. It does not aim to destroy weapons already deployed. It aims to prevent their replacement. And in air defense, replacement is everything. Interceptors are finite, radars degrade, missiles expire. A shield that cannot be replenished is not a shield, it is a countdown. For Moscow, this represents a strategic inversion. The S-400 was meant to deny Western air power. Instead, it is now being denied the conditions of its own existence, not through a single decisive blow, but through cumulative pressure that narrows options month by month. As pressure tightens, Moscow faces a strategic reality with no clean exit. The exposure of the S-400's supply chain fragility does not present Russia with difficult choices. It presents it with only bad ones. Every path forward carries costs that strike at the core of Russian military power, economic survival, and global standing. The first option is escalation. Russia could attempt to deter further pressure by expanding military strikes, widening the battlefield, or threatening retaliation against infrastructure beyond Ukraine. But this is a gamble with diminishing returns. Escalation does not restore access to radar laminates, beryllium ceramics, or advanced microelectronics. It may harden Western resolve rather than fracture it. And critically, it risks accelerating the very coordination Moscow fears: tighter sanctions, enforcement, faster intelligence sharing, and broader acceptance of supply chain warfare as legitimate statecraft. The second option is deeper concealment, pushing production further underground, routing components through ever more complex networks across China, Kazakhstan, and other intermediaries. This path preserves deniability, but at a punishing cost. Each additional layer slows delivery, inflates prices, and increases defect rates. Quality control erodes, maintenance cycles lengthen. The S-400 becomes harder not only to build, but to sustain. What looks like resilience on paper becomes fragility in practice. The third option is the most politically damaging, sacrificing exports to save domestic air defense. Contracts with countries like India are already delayed, quietly undermining one of Russia's last reliable sources of foreign currency and strategic influence. Every missile diverted inward is a signal outward telling current and prospective buyers that Russian systems may not be supported in crisis. In arms markets, trust is not rhetorical, it is logistical. Once credibility is questioned, it does not return quickly. This is the trap. Russia cannot fully protect its airspace without cannibalizing its export reputation. It cannot preserve exports without weakening domestic defense, and it cannot solve either problem without access to a global industrial base. It publicly rejects, but privately depends upon. The S-400 was designed to deny adversaries freedom of action in the sky. Instead, it has denied Russia strategic flexibility on the ground. What was meant to be a symbol of strength has become a constraint, a system so central that it cannot be abandoned, yet so dependent that it cannot be secured. In war, power is measured not by slogans or showcases, but by the range of viable choices a state retains. On that measure, Moscow's options are narrowing fast, and when options disappear, outcomes cease to be strategic, they become inevitable. The unraveling of the S-400 is not merely a Russian problem, it is a warning shot across the entire global defense landscape. What is collapsing is not just a weapons system, but a belief that advanced military power can be insulated from the world that produces it. For years, the S-400 symbolized an alternative to Western dominance, a promise of autonomy, reliability, and strategic independence. Today, that promise is under quiet but relentless scrutiny. Operators are asking uncomfortable questions. Can spare parts be delivered on time? Will radar performance degrade as substitute materials are used? Can upgrades and long-term maintenance be guaranteed if production is disrupted? These are not theoretical concerns. They determine whether a system defends airspace or merely occupies it. The consequences ripple outward. Arms markets function on confidence, not ideology. Once buyers suspect that a system may become unsupportable under pressure, the damage is lasting, contracts stall, insurance premiums rise, maintenance becomes a strategic risk. The S-400's greatest vulnerability may not be interception failure, but reputational collapse. More broadly, this moment exposes a deeper truth about modern power. No state, however ambitious, can fully escape global interdependence. Supply chains are not weaknesses by default. They are sources of strength when they are transparent, lawful, and resilient. They become liabilities only when states attempt to weaponize denial while relying on the very systems they seek to undermine. What makes this moment dangerous is not that Russia may lose a portion of its air defense capacity, it is that others are watching and learning. Supply chain warfare, once a secondary tool, is now moving to the center of strategic planning. Future conflicts may be decided not by the number of missiles launched, but by which side controls materials, standards, logistics, and enforcement. This marks a shift in the grammar of war. The decisive arena is no longer only the battlefield. It is the factory floor, the shipping manifest, the export license, and the enforcement agency. Power now flows through coordination as much as through force. The S-400 was never a steel shield. It was a globally entangled system wrapped in nationalist rhetoric. That contradiction has now been exposed in the harshest possible environment, a prolonged, high-intensity war. History offers a clear lesson. Systems built on denial eventually fail when reality intrudes, and in the end, it is not the loudest weapons, but the quiet structures beneath them that determine who endures and who does not. Thank you for watching.